There is much to learn.
My name is Robert. That is my actual name. I am the tech lead on Skyblivion. I've been on Skyblivion for just about 2 years now, serving in that role. I do all the things sort of tech related, as I'm gonna mess this up again. Serena. I'm sorry. I am terrible with names.
That is close enough.
Is that
Yep.
close? Serena. Okay, thank you.
You can
Serena was.
You can call me
Hmm?
Sierra if it's easier.
Sarah. Sarah's easier, yes. Sarah was saying, I do all the things technical. I handle tools. I handle our build. I merge all of our other devs' work. I make sure it's not broken. I fix all the errors. Then I put it in. I'm very protective of my build, as build managers should be. I don't let nobody touch it. That's my baby. That's my thing. I also do development work on Xedit, CKPE, NifSkope a little bit. I work on SNIFF, all tools I'm going to show you today. I also pitch in a little bit to PyNifly, and that gets into, I'll get into it. So for when I'm getting stuff from a 3D person, I'm going to implement it in Skyblivion, and this is our preference. I know there's people that prefer other tools, but for the most part, for Skyrim modding, I recommend using Blender for the sole reason that there is a functioning NIF plugin, so you can directly edit NIFs in Blender. That's literally the only reason. If you're an artist and you're in the industry and you use 3ds Max, you use Maya, there's a couple others. No hate, all the tools are great. We recommend Blender just because it's free and there's a plugin. That's the only reason. There's no shade on other tools here. But so our people use Blender so that, like, say, I think I have an example NIF here. So if I import this, you can directly import a NIF. I'll take a cathedral NIF that we have in Skyblivion. I'll use this as a guinea pig. I forgot to do a thing. Hold on. There. Now you can see it. Okay, so we got this is our cathedral. You've seen it in our videos, our dev diaries, and our trailers. This is what we use. So if I'm a 3D person, and one of our guys uses Maya, so he's a little bit on the side, but he's used to it because he's in the industry. But for the most part, all of our people use Blender. Okay, you do all your 3D modeling work, you do your texturing, your UVing. If you want to do shader setup in Blender, you can do that too. I usually recommend more of the data stuff to be done in NifSkope, just because for me, it's more convenient, it's faster, it's easier to do. But you can do it in Blender. It's all supported by PyNifly. So if I'm a 3D person, say the model's done, I'm gonna export it. Go to File. If you've never used PyNifly, it adds simple menu options. Just export PyNifly. I'm gonna go here. This is the original NIF, so I'm gonna make this a test. PyNifly does not support collision, or mesh collision specifically. You can do primitives like boxes, spheres, cylinders, other things, but real generated collision, PyNifly does not support. Not yet anyway. So I got a 3D person. They're giving me a NIF. This is where I come in. I'm going to implement it. So I have. Did that not export? Come on, Blender. Don't fail me right now in the middle of a lecture. Meshes. Oh no, it's there. I went to the wrong folder. I apologize. Here. So I would get this NIF. I'll use this as a test NIF. You'll notice it's a lot smaller file size. That's because this NIF already has collision, and as PyNifly doesn't support it, it gets deleted. So I get to do that myself. So if I get a NIF to implement, first things first, I'm going to open up a NifSkope because I do expect any file I get to be a .nif. We don't do FBXs here, in Skyblivion at least. We go direct to NIF. I make sure all the things are correct with it, make sure there's no obvious bugs. I'll do shader checks and whatnot. And that brings me to the first other tool of the trade that you may not be familiar with, which is SNIFF. This has been around since like early 2010s by Zilov, one of the legends of the community. I'm a developer of SNIFF. I help him with it. I work on it along with Xedit. This is probably the ultimate tool you could ever have for implementing and error checking NIFs. So there is two functions. There's a lot of functions. It has a lot of capability. The two primary functions you're going to be interested in is check for errors and the universal fixer. That is truly a universal fixer. The goal for us, for that function, is to fix all of the things that are conceivable to be wrong in a NIF for data, right? So if I check errors on, let me rename this so I don't scan that. On my test NIF here, let's see what we get. Okay, we have a bunch of things wrong. There's some shader flags that are set that don't need to be set. We have a BSX flag set for Havoc, which is for collision, but it doesn't have any because we haven't generated it. And there's some duplicate geometry. We have detection for that in SNIFF, and there's an easy way to fix that. Right in NifSkope, and I'll provide links to the latest of all these things. You can go to Spells, Batch, remove duplicate vertices. Boom. Done. Fixed. Easy. What that does is it scans per tri-shape every vertex, and if it finds any that have identical position X, Y, and Z, rotation X, Y, and Z, normal, UV data, and tangents, and vertex colors if the data exists, out to 6 decimal points, because we want to be really safe with these kind of actions. You don't want to damage the work from the artist. If it finds any identical vertices where there's pairs, it deletes them, because that's redundant, and it serves no functional purpose, no functional or visual purpose whatsoever. It's useless. So, we delete them. That's that. This is because it doesn't have collision, which we're going to fix. I'll show you that with chunk merge. And in some shader flags, it shouldn't be set. This is one you'll see a lot, because Bethesda, in their wonderful wisdom, in their 3D, they use 3ds Max internally, and their 3ds Max NIF exporter, for some reason, we don't know why. I have talked to them. They don't know either. Every single NIF, every single shader has the env-map light fade shader flag set in all circumstances. They have fixed this in the last couple years, but they didn't retroactively fix that on all vanilla NIFs. So if you're using vanilla NIFs as an example, you need to be wary of bugs like this. Okay, the env-map light shader flag only is applicable if the shader is an environment shader, the eye environment shader, or multi-layer parallax, which is a variant of the environment shader. All other shaders should not have that flag set because it doesn't apply. You're going to see a lot. You're going to see me saying that a lot these days. So that's check for errors. That's what it reports. If I just run that again, it still says remove. Did I not save? I did not save. There we go. There we go. So no more duplicate vertices warning. The rest of this I can fix with the universal fixer right here. Just click a button, and if you set it up, you get this text. You get this text file with the report of everything it did per block in the NIF. It removed a bunch of shader flags because they don't apply, and it removed the BSX flags because there's no flags that are required. Now, if I check for errors again, it should return nothing. Exactly. When I first get a NIF, I go through it. Any errors, I immediately fix. No matter what. I don't proceed until it's an error-free NIF. Right? Next, I'm going to go into it again. It's error-free NIF. And then I'm going to actually take a look at it. Make sure there's nothing visually, like, really broken with it. Like this one's already a finished NIF, but like it works. There's no doors because those are separate placed objects, but this looks pretty good. There's no issues here. Next, we're going to do collision. So before I do that, there are some NifSkope tricks you can do. If blocks are set up in a really wacky way. Like, this has a lot of tri-shapes in it. You want to be careful with NIFs that have a lot of tri-shapes, because the more tri-shapes you have, the more draw calls you're going to have imposed on the game during play. A rough calculation for how many draw calls something will use is for every texture that is going to be rendered on the NIF is 3 draw calls. Because the way the render pipeline works in the game is it's rendering on all 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. So each texture, there's 3, right? So each tri-shape, typically there's a diffuse and a normal, that's 6. If we have 25 tri-shapes, that's 75 draw calls for this NIF, plus any light being cast on a tri-shape, that's another draw call. Any shadow being cast on a light, that's another draw call. So you want to be mindful of that for performance reasons. The game being programmed in DirectX 11 is a lot of technical information. Feel free to ask questions. Being programmed in DirectX 11, DirectX 11 single threads draw calls. So if you look in Task Manager, it's only going to be on one thread. And there's a sort of soft limit of about 15,000 draw calls for any point of view to give you all perspective. So if this is using 75 draw calls for just this one NIF, you've got a budget of give or take about 15,000. That's what you have to work with. This is one object. If you have a well-cluttered city, you're probably going to be looking at about 10,000 from any particular point of view, right? So you want to be mindful of that. You don't want excessive draw calls, okay? If you have NIFs that have multiple tri-shapes that have identical sets of textures used, and the shader properties have identical settings, then what you can do, I don't know if this one has any, but you can go to SNIFF. There's a function here called group shapes. This is going to scan your NIF, going to find any tri-shapes that have identical textures. It doesn't scan shader properties because that's more complicated. But it will scan tri-shapes with the same textures and group them under an inode. Let me check this. There's none, but I will force a test as an example. If you had, say, these 2 tri-shapes had the same textures, you could put them into one tri-shape. And what SNIFF would do is you'll group shapes, it'll put them all under 9 nodes, with the name of the 9 node being the texture in common, and then you can merge shapes here. And it'll put it all together, and you'll reduce your draw calls. The only thing you have to be mindful of is the light limits. So there's all sorts of counterbalancing points here. In-game, you can only have a maximum of 7 lights being rendered on a tri-shape at once. If you merge a bunch of tri-shapes together, you're reducing the number of lights that can be in and around your object. For exterior buildings, that's not much of a concern we find. Usually for exteriors, lights are far enough apart that that's not as much of an issue. You still have to think about it. This is more so for interior things. Like interior building shells usually have to be split a lot, like into hundreds, to have really good interior lighting. So these are all things you have to think about when you're working on as an implementer. Okay. At the same time, without destroying the artist's work, because you want the thing to look as beautiful as you can make it. So I check for errors in SNIFF. I open up the NifSkope, the NIF in NifSkope, make sure there's no visual issues with it. It looks right. Merge any tri-shapes that can be merged without, breaking lighting. Some other things we'll do, and this is in NifSkope, is under Spells Batch, you want to optimize all indices. This one's like really technical. This might go over some people's heads. But if you click that, what that button does, it uses a library called Mesh Optimizer. It's not our code, it's external. What that does is it scans the vertices, the vertexes, and the triangles, and it optimizes the physical right order of the data in the file to reduce the number of, what's it called? GPU shader invocations. That's the technical term. What that is the GPU side of a draw call. And if you have non-continuous geometry, the GPU has to do more of those to render the object. I hope that makes sense to folks. So if you've got, this has 135 vertices on this tri-shape, and you can see it's here, it's right here, and it's right here. So these are 3 separate chunks of geometry. That's going to need 3 GPU shader invocations to render that. If all of the vertices of this chunk were not continuous in the vertex array, like they're not all grouped next to each other, it would have to do more shader invocations because it's not a continuous. It can't just read the whole chunk at once. I hope this makes sense. If this doesn't make sense to anyone, please ask in the text chat. But what that optimize indices does is it scans all the data and it will physically reorder the list to minimize the number of continuous chunks of geometry. It does it for vertices and it does it for triangles. The other thing I'd like to do is batch update all bounds. What this does is it updates the bounding sphere data right here on all blocks in the NIF to be accurate to the data that's there. Because that's more of a NIF specific thing. Tools like Blender don't necessarily export it correctly. Sometimes it's right. If it's like a small object, like it'll be close. I like to use NifSkope to do it because our formula for calculating it is a lot more fine-tuned, so it's more accurate results. I like to do that. And that's it from NifSkope. After that, you're going to go into Xedit. Let me tell you what. Let me put this here. You want to get the object in world. So on Skyblivion for implementation, it's not just making sure the NIF is correct, making sure the textures are correct. We also got to put it in your project in your ESM. So I'm going to go ahead and load up Xedit. We use MO2 if you're not familiar. That's a mod manager. That's one of the things we use and recommend. I'm going to load up Xedit. This might take a second. Does anyone have any questions about anything I have rambled about thus far? While I'm waiting for this to load, I will take any and all questions.
So I had 2 I put in the chat, but I think you
Wait.
answered number 1.
Wait, I don't see that. Wait, I'm looking at the. You know what? I am looking at the absolute wrong text chat. I am so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, let me read this real quick. Does the number of shapes in the NIF has any? Oh yes, yeah. Okay, yeah, I did that. So it impacts. So the foreshadow light limit is per cell. So no, it doesn't impact shadows for that limit. It will impact draw calls derived from shadowcasters because that is per tri-shape. But the foreshadow caster limit is per cell. More specifically, it's per room marker in an interior. Because if you set up room marker, this is more of a level design point. But if you set up room markers in your interior, everything outside the room marker that you're in, except what you have direct line of sight through a portal to see, does not render, including lights and shadowcasters. So really, the 4 limit is per room marker if those are set up. If they're not set up, then it's cell-wide. And 2 does the room. So it doesn't explicitly account for seams because, but it doesn't need to because of how it determines what's a duplicate, if that makes sense. So what if you have 2 vertices on the same tri-shape that have identical data out to 6 decimal points? We go out to 6 decimal points to make sure, like, hey, we're trying to be safe with it. You could probably do 3 decimal points, and it would be fine. But we're maximizing because the data is stored out to 6. We're being extra strict and safe with it because we don't. Again, these are batch action like tools. We don't want to destroy people's work, so we're being safe with that. If it has the same position XYZ, rotation XYZ, scale, the UV value, the position coordinates, the normal value, the tangents, same vertex color, color code, etc., then it by definition is not making any difference to how the model looks, either in NifSkope in-game or in a 3D modeling program. It is definitionally useless. And in testing, at least to date, I've never seen a case where that actually does change how the model looks. Anything's possible. I suppose it could exist that it will in some circumstance. If you ever find one, please let me know. But I have not seen one yet. That's what I can say. I'm pretty sure mathematically that's good. So I always run that on all NIFs in all circumstances, all the things I do, because I'm a data nut. I'm not much of a visual person. I'm a data guy. So for me, all of the stuff I'm doing, I consider mandatory on all things all the time. And it makes it for a great test case because I'm managing Skyblivion and we have 20,000 NIFs. So I have a great playground to test our tools on. So our stuff, all this stuff should be really, really safe for you guys to use. So I have no reservations about advising you guys to use these things. If there ever is an issue, by all means, ping me, give me a test NIF. I'll figure it out. I'll fix it. Any issues with these tools? I see, I'm going to say this wrong, but pint of flan, you're typing presumably a question. I will happily take your question. While I wait for that, I'm going to create, so if you're on a project and you're implementing something, but you're not the build manager, you're not going to be directly editing the primary plugin of the build. So you're going to make a new plugin, which you can do in Xedit by, you load up your project's ESM, in my case, Skyblivion ESM. You're going to right click in the empty space, create a new file. You're going to pick its type. For the most part, you're just going to pick the first option unless you really know what you're doing with plugin stuff. You're going to give it a name without the extension it says. So, Cathedral Implementation Test. I spelled that wrong. Now I have a plugin. This is a building, so it's going to be a static record. So you're going to want to add, you're going to right-click your plugin, this little add menu. You're going to find in this expanding list the static record type right here. That's going to add a group. You're going to click on that and add a static record. Here it's going to have you pick a form ID. You can usually just click OK. That doesn't really matter. And now I have a static record. So I'm going to give it an editor ID. AU Cathedral Test. You're going to add a model, which is where you define the NIF. And what you're going to do, let me go get the model path. That's not the model path. This is the model path. So it's going to be, so for all NIF model paths, you don't, they're all relative to mesh, the meshes folder. You don't include meshes in the folder path. So it starts at the first folder. So architecture / cathedral / exterior / Skyb cathedral test.nif. And that's it. For a static, that's really all there is to it. In Xedit at least. So I'm going to save that plugin. You just set the NIF path here. If you're familiar with the CK, you can use the CK to do the same thing. I like Xedit better. I can do things a lot faster with it, and I am biased because I am a developer of Xedit. But if you're familiar, if you're more comfortable with creating objects in the CK, you can do that too. That's totally valid. I'm going to save this plugin, and what I'm going to do is we're going to go into the CK because there's one thing you have to do in the CK. We don't have this in Xedit just yet, but it is on my list. You have another question. Okay, while Pinefly is typing on Sneak, I love using Xedit to add objects, but is there any disadvantage to doing that instead of using the CK directly, like calculating bounds? You read my mind, Sarah. So, calculating bounds is something you have to do in the CK. We don't have that in Xedit yet. As I said, it's on my list. Disadvantage? No. I would say, depending on your workload, if you have a lot of things to implement, like if you got 100 NIFs, I would definitely recommend Xedit over the CK, especially if things are in, oh, let's see, I'm getting a lot of questions. Will this be recorded? Sarah, are you recording this? I think we said you can record this. I think we said it was going to be recorded. You are recording.
Yes, I'm recording, but given my failure at the beginning of this whole thing, let's hope that we have a recording by the end.
Let's hope so. That'd be fantastic. That'd be good. I will say, for folks that are just hopping in, just real quickly, when I get a NIF, the first thing I do for errors is I will use a program called SNIFF. This is actually, it's a tool that is on Nexus on its own mod page, but as of probably tonight, it will be included with Xedit directly, because we're about to do an Xedit update as it happens. And SNIFF I've added to the project, so it's going to go out with Xedit. So it'll be really easy to acquire and whatnot. But SNIFF is the tool. I use check for errors to find the errors, if there's any there. Some of the errors are deterministic in nature to fix. So we have a universal fixer that just fixes them, right? And some are not deterministic, meaning there's no single immediate solution. So those will still be reported and checked for errors after you run universal fixer. Stuff like, hey, this particular shader has a shader type and or shader flags that require certain textures, but there's no texture in this particular slot. That's not we don't know what texture to put, so that there's nothing with that in the fixer, but it'll still report as an error because it's required by the shader, if that makes sense. So you'll still see stuff like that. And I have all sorts of texture checks in SNIFF. It'll report missing textures, as well as textures that are present but not needed relative to the shader type and flags, which could mean either your textures are missing or present but not needed, or, yes, I will send all links for these tools. I'll include everything. Or that could mean your shader type and or shader flags are wrong. That is something that I have seen happen. So if you have a shader that has an E, an environment map or a cube map, and an M on it, an environment mask, but the shader is not an environment shader, it's going to report that those two textures are present but not used. That could mean either, because you have to read the intent of the artist, and if you know the artist, you can talk to him. The correct solution might be to change the shader type, not remove the textures. You see how there's ambiguity there. So the universal fixer won't touch that. It'll just report, hey, with the current data, this is wrong. For non-deterministic fixes, that requires some knowledge on your part as an implementer to figure out which way to go. And there are a lot of those nuanced things that we detect that aren't fixable. When I say fixable, I mean run the fixer on it to fix them. So there's a lot of them. I don't want to go through every single error type unless you have questions that I can. But if you are working on a NIF and you are using SNIF's check for errors and you don't understand an error, you can always ping me. Ping me. My name's Robert. I'm in every server. If you're in a Discord server, I am probably in that server. I'm in every server. But you can always ping me here too. Probably that'd be in the asset implementation channel. That would be where discussion of this should take place. Though we know, Sarah, that yes, Sarah, I check absolutely 100% of all NIFs with SNIFF. Again, from my perspective, again, I'm a data guy. I'm not a creative necessarily. I'm not a level designer. I know these skill sets, but that's not my thing. I'm a data guy. I care about data. If there is a single error in any asset, I'm gonna be over dramatic on purpose. If there's a single error from me, and this is not hating on anyone, this is just me being pedantic, I consider that an abject failure. I'm being dramatic. It is what it is. But yeah, I do every asset. If there's any errors, I will fix them. I don't care what they are. I will fix them. They will be fixed because I have to manage the build for Skyblivion. I can't honestly say that I'm doing my job well if I allow broken stuff into the build. Again, my standards are incredibly high. Some of this might be going over y'all head. That's okay. By all means, ask questions. I set the technical standard so unbelievably high for the following reason. From a leadership perspective, I know from managing people that the people you manage or you lead or you're coordinating will do half of what you do right, and they will do twice what you do wrong. There's no data behind that. That is just a general observation. But if you're doing something wrong, your people that you manage are going to really do it wrong. And if you do it right, they're not quite going to do it as right. That's just general observation I've found. So, understanding that, I set the bar, the standard, so freaking high that the half that my people do right is actually acceptable. So it's sort of I'm hacking the people, so to speak, if that makes sense to all of you. But yeah, I check every asset with SNIFF. If I get textures, like if the NIF is using new textures, I will audit the textures as well, because and I'll post a sheet that has all this. Certain textures have to be in certain compression formats, and most textures you'll likely get in a 4K uncompressed state, more than likely, which is good for source textures. But for implementation, you don't want to actually do that. I think, for the most part, most textures in 99.9% of cases do not need to be 4K. They just don't. They can look fantastic if they are. I'm not criticizing the visuals whatsoever. But to achieve the thing, they don't need to be 4K. And that takes up a lot of file space. In Skyblivion's case, I've been working on that front a lot, because we have an entire game, and we have to ship this thing in some kind of easily distributable fashion. For Nexus, we have to get our build under 20 gigabytes to be able to put it into one file on Nexus. Right now, our build is like 60 gigabytes. 50 of that is textures, because a lot of our textures are 4K uncompressed. And for textures, if you have a diffuse, if you have an alpha channel, it'll need to be BC7, but it could be 2K. 2K, obviously, if you're going to be downscaling textures, be very careful with your visual judgment. Make sure it doesn't get all blocky in game. Please, don't piss off any artists. Please don't do that. I try very hard not to piss off the artist, but there are significant performance gains to be had from putting textures in the right compression format and downscaling them to 2K. You don't need everything to be 4K, particularly small objects. So I'll go through the types. A diffuse, I would probably go no higher than 2K. Maybe 1K for tiny objects, but as a rule, I don't go higher than 2K. 2K looks fantastic on most things. It looks great. If it doesn't at 2K, that could imply that the UVs of the model using the texture are not dense enough. So that may be the case to send it back to the artist to touch up the UVs to make them denser. That's actually what I was getting at. Okay, so it's an excellent question. Wouldn't large environment assets need to be 4K, like mountains? Well, if you are, I don't want this to sound bad, but I'll say it. But this isn't how I mean it. If you want to do a quick and dirty and get a mountain made and get it in game, then yeah, more than likely you might need them to be 4K. However, there's some tricks to the trade that you can do. I'm not a master of this myself, but I know the artists on our project are, and so I know how to explain it. If you have say a mountain, if you have a really well-created tileable texture, like there's no artifacting at the edges, it tiles wonderfully. Okay, depending on how it's built, you can put the UV scale. In fact, I'll show it to you in a NIF. You can put the UV scale. Where is it? It is here. On a shader property here, you got UV scale. You can set the UV scale to 2, and then downscale the texture from 4K to 2K, and it should, in theory, look like a 4K texture because you've scaled it up. And UV scaling doesn't have nearly the resource usage as a 4K texture versus a 2K texture. because a 2K texture is 1/4 of the file size. So your VRAM usage is down, your GPU usage is down a tiny amount per texture, but we're talking at scale for all assets. You can do that. That's a trick. Now, that's a lot more work. You may have time constraints. I understand that. But if you really want to min-max this engine, which I think is a good thing to work towards, then yeah, this is worth doing. If it's a tileable texture. If it's not a tileable texture, you got something that's like more static. You may have to have the artist. You'd want the artist to do this, to rework the UVs to be a bit denser, so that at 2K it doesn't look blocky and blotchy. You know what I'm talking about. Y'all have seen it. And that's why I would say I don't think textures need to be 4K. Because you can do some work. Like it doesn't take days. You can do it in maybe an hour, depending on how complicated the object is. Like as an artist, you can clean that up. So for me, I try to work with our artists, and I try to make sure that no texture has to be 4K. That's my goal. There are cases where they have to be. Like if you have a texture atlas, where you've got multiple textures crammed into the same file in order to have fewer tri-shapes, that's a case where it should be 4K or higher. Atlases, I get, 100%. But individual textures, I try my best to work with the artist to not have it be 4K. That's my goal. To your question there, Sarah, do I use BC7 for all diffuse? No. So any diffuse texture that does not have an alpha channel, I never leave as BC7. Always BC1. Again, I'm a data guy. A visual person, an artist, might disagree with that. I'm just looking at the data. That's my priority. That's where I'm coming from. So again, there's nuance to this, but for me, if I see a diffuse that doesn't have an alpha channel, and it's not used on anything that needs an alpha channel for transparency, I will always make it BC1, because BC1 is 50% of the file size as BC7. No, I know you do. And that an artist may fight you on that, but the way the format on disk is, the alpha channel is additional data. The RGB channels in a BC1 versus BC7 are identical. Like it's the same file size and all that. The sort of textile, like the color palette picking, is the formula's a little bit different. But if you're going from a BC7 texture that's already BC7, not uncompressed, you can go from BC7 to BC1, and it won't change how the texture looks at all. Like there might be some mathematical differences, but there isn't a hope and a prayer of anyone being able to see that. I think, unless it's like a 16K texture and you're zooming in, like you're not going to see that. That'll be impossible. Yeah, you'd have to analyze the numbers in the file to see that, but it's nothing. Not necessarily. Okay, so normal maps, the alpha channel of a normal map is where you put your specular channel. That's where you put your specular. However, you can have a normal without a specular channel. That's absolutely a thing you could do. In that case, similar to diffuses, BC1. Because if you don't have an alpha channel, there's no point in BC7. Literally, there's no point. You can also do, depending on your setup, and this is where you can get really, you can hack the engine. The engine supports a separate specular texture. You can do that. I'll just use this. Actually, can y'all read the text on my screen? Is my resolution high enough? Is the text readable?
It's yes, but
Hold on,
it's small.
It's small. Hold on, I can fix it. Let me go to 4K. Okay, how about now? Is that better? I don't know how to zoom on NifSkope. Actually, wait. Let me. There's got to be a scaling in here somewhere. There is not. Okay. I increased the resolution of my stream, so it should be legible. So you should be able to read things. It's tiny font. I do apologize. I'll use this as an example. So you can set up. So ordinarily you'd have your specular in your normal, but you don't have to do that. Even if you want specular, You can have that as a separate texture. How you do it is you enable the specular shader flag, and then shader, I think it's under shader flags 1, you enable model space normals. Okay? Enabling that flag has nothing to do with whether the actual normal was calculated via that scheme. That just enables the texture slot. So what that does is, if you do that, the engine will expect no specular channel in the normal, but instead you'll put a separate _s texture in texture 7. So that's where the specular texture would go. You could do that if for whatever reason you got an object and you want the normal, the RGB, to be 2K, but you want the specular channel to be relatively simple, e.g. where it could be like a 512 resolution texture. That would technically be better for performance on a very marginal scale, but that would be better than having a 2K, quote, specular in the normal. So you could do that. That's absolutely a thing you could do. Most people don't. I don't think most people know that that exists. But you could do that. If you look at any vanilla armor NIFs, the armor add-on NIFs, they'll have a tri-shape for like the person, like you'll see like the body skin. On that tri-shape, they use this because all of the body shapes use separate specular textures. And that's how they do it. That's how the engine handles it. You could do that on anything, on any object. It doesn't matter. Model space normals plus specular. And in fact, if I save this and I check errors with SNIFF, it reports that. I have coverage for that. Specular texture, slot 7, must be set for model space normals plus specular flags. That's where it goes. I don't have checks, like SNIFF doesn't scan textures, really. It will scan textures for like if it uses a compression format that's not BC, because those don't work in Skyrim. But that's it. It doesn't know how to tell if it has an alpha channel or not. But in such a case, you would make the normal BC1 with alpha stripped if you were going to do this. But that is an option. If you have specular in the normal, then to your point, Sierra, BC7. Always. Because you have an alpha channel. Let's see, somebody else has it. For the other texture types, so you've got an _G for a glow map, glow mask. It's really a mask. An _P, if any of you do anything with parallax, requires EMB, CS, or the parallax shader fix mods if you want to get into that. The E, the environment or cube map. The M, the environment. M, not EM. I'm looking at you, Bethesda. It's M. For the environment mask. The _I for the inner layer diffuse of a multi-layer parallax shader. The S for specular. SL, RL, BL for soft lighting, backlighting, if you're not using the glow shader, or backlighting textures. None of those, under any circumstances, should ever be BC7. Because none of those textures ever have an alpha channel. There is no support for that. Only BC7 should only be used on a diffuse and a normal. That's it. Because those are the only two textures that are able to have an alpha channel. So if you have any E, M, G, I, etc. textures that are in BC7, you can immediately change what format they're in. Either to BC1 or an _P or parallax texture should be BC4 because that is a single channel texture. It's not RGB. As well as an _M, the environment mask. That should go to, I'll drop a chart at some point. An M and a P are BC4. Those are both single channel textures. And that's actually better because if you have a BC7M and you take it to BC4, you're going to have a lot more detail available in the M because it's using the same number of bytes. It's going to use 3 times the file size to store the detail because it's one channel, not 3, in the same file size, right? So all M's, all P's, BC4. Also, if you do, and S's. So if you have separate specular textures, those are single channel as well. So also BC4. NVIDIA texture tools, which ones should not be used. For the most part, our artists operate directly in DDS. However, if someone does give me a PNG, NVIDIA texture tools is a good one, and or Paint.net. I use Paint.net predominantly. I'm sorry, predominantly because let me find a texture. Textures. I like Paint.net because it's free and it's like stupid easy to use and it supports all the formats. You can open up a PNG in Paint.net, click File, click Save As, and you're gonna do DDS and blah blah blah. Like it's real easy. Paint.net is my favorite. NVIDIA Texture Tools works too, if you're familiar with that. I got no objections to that. My go-to is Paint.net. That's my recommendation. You know, there's all sorts of tools. I don't know of any that like you should not use. Photoshop, a lot of people use, but you have to pay for that. So that's a barrier to using Photoshop. So I don't make that my recommendation, even though for texture work, Photoshop is a lot more powerful. But for an implementer, you don't need to really be doing all that. So Paint.net is sufficient. You're just downscaling, you're doing format changes. That's really what an implementation is doing with textures. So I recommend Paint.net, Zero. Let's see, where was I? Let's see. Oh, I didn't do collision. I need to do collision. Hey, that would help. Okay. So, does this NIF have, this NIF does not have collision. Yes, I need to show you that. That's an important part of this. Okay. For collision, we use a tool called Chunk Merge. Part of the NIF utils suite. Chunk Merge, it generates mesh collision. For complicated meshes like this, you want mesh collision, without a doubt. However, mesh collision can be very resource intensive if you don't do it correctly. I'm going to show you how to do it correctly. So, you're going to take your NIF, say this cathedral, you're going to duplicate it, and this is going to be your collision mesh. Okay, you're going to open this up. With the NIF in SE format, I should clarify, all NIFs should always, ultimately, be in SE format. So BS tri-shapes, not NI tri-shapes, and etc. Right? They take up less file size. They're a lot more performance friendly. Always convert your NIFs to SE at the end of implementation. Always. For Chunk Merge, as a tool, it only supports LE NIFs because it hasn't been updated in 12 years, which is before SE came out. Which is annoying, but that's what we have to work with. Me, I'm currently working, it's not functional yet, but I'm working on generating mesh collision right in NifSkope, so that you don't need to convert to LE to use Chunk Merge. That is something I'm working on. No ETA. I have no clue when that's going to be ready. It's very complicated. But using Chunk Merge, you're going to make your copy, and we're going to do a little bit of decimation because we don't need exact one-to-one geometry for the collision. That would be very bad for performance if you do that for a complicated NIF like this. So for this NIF, I'm going to rename this so I don't touch it. You would never want to do this on the actual NIF, but for a collision NIF, this doesn't matter. You can use update tangents and binormals in SNIFF with the face normals checkbox checked. Be very wary of this. Do not run this blindly on actual models, please. You may or may not destroy the artist's work if they did custom normals in a 3D program. Okay, if they didn't, and they're just operating off what face normals produces, then you're fine. A lot of models work with the default face normals. Like, you don't have to do custom normals. That's not required. If an artist did, don't destroy their work, please, I beg of you. But for a collision NIF, that don't matter. It's collision, who cares? So, face normals on the geometry. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to make sure there's no more... There is some more duplicates that it found as a result because of facing. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to optimize indices again. And then we're going to decimate this NIF. This is something that's probably going to blow some people's minds. When y'all think of decimation, you're thinking you got to go into Blender, or 3ds Max or whatever into a 3D program to do decimation, right? That's what most people would assume. Guess what? I built Decimate right into NifSkope via Simplify. If I right-click a tri-shape, it only supports BS tri-shape. It doesn't support NI tri-shapes because the format's different. Right-click, Mesh, Simplify. You're going to get this little box. Okay? There's a bunch of options here that tools like Blender don't give you for their Decimate tool. Okay? Let me explain it. There's target count. This is a percentage of the current triangle count that you're going to try to get to. For the most part, I leave that at the lowest possible value of 0.001 because I want to decimate as much as possible within the constraints that this thing has. Okay? Max error rate. We added this because positional data and the other data points on a vertex are stored as floats, not integers. And due to the nature of how floats work, there's a certain level of imprecision, which I'm not going to explain because that's a mathematical lecture. That would give you all headaches. But floats are not precise. They're not absolute. So when doing manipulations to float-based data, you have to accept a certain margin of error in the results of your data that you're doing. That's what this is. This max error acts as a cap, or a constraint on that error rate. So it can go from 0.0001 up to 0.5. That's a percentage, and the error that you're actually getting is here. So if I were to simplify this, that's the actual error rate, and it did some simplification. There's some other fields here that are useful. The minimum number of triangles, if you wanted to have a floor, like you want a minimum of 1,000 triangles, you could put that here. I generally put it at 1, because by default, I want as much decimation as I can get without destroying the artist's work. Again, I'm repeating myself. Do not destroy the artist's work. You will piss them off. Please, do not do that. I am not advising you to destroy artist's work. It's not my fault. Playing the safe game here. There's options here called lock borders. This checkbox will tell the simplification algorithm to not remove or collapse geometry edges on the outward external shape of the object. So you'll preserve the shape that way. If you're in Blender and you're doing a decimate modifier and you're slinging the slider back and forth, it doesn't care about the shape of the object at all. You'll get holes, you'll get spikes, it'll look like crap really quickly. NifSkope preserves the shape of the object. You can also have the normal weight, the UV weight, and the vertex color weights, which by default I'd put at 100. What that does is, okay, if we have a couple triangles, and there's normals, UVs, and vertex colors on the vertices of those triangles, okay, and it's going to condense that to fewer triangles, what the algorithm's going to do is it's going to interpolate the difference between the two values, it'll average them basically, and that'll be the new value of the reduced vertices, okay? That way, the normals, UVs, and vertex colors aren't affected. Blender doesn't care about any of that. It's just going to decimate destructively. We make this as a safe, a smart decimate, so to speak. That's what you could call it. So, for collision, I'm going to put the max error at maximum, and it's going to do it. So that takes that shape from 1088... Which one am I looking at? These little spikes. That's what we're looking at. Okay. So if I do simplify with max error rate of 0.5, but still constraining it, so lock borders, maximum preservation of normals, UVs, VCs, that makes a little bit of difference to how it looks, and it cut the triangles in half. But keep in mind, this NIF is for collision. We don't care really how it looks, as long as it's close. With Simplify, you can also do it per tri-shape. You can also do it in bulk by going to Batch, Simplify All Shapes. What this button does, it's going to take the last settings you used individually, so this, and apply it to every single BS tri-shape in the NIF. So if I zoom out, watch how the NIF looks, the model. Spells, batch, simplify all shapes. That basically didn't change. Did anyone see any change there? Anything that would be noticeable at all? But we got rid of a lot of geometry. Like this block we got 3,000 vertices removed. That's really good. We can keep going. Because of float in precision, you can rerun this and get some more reduction because it's comparing newer values that then have their own imprecision. So you can keep going. For a collision, this is fine. This doesn't matter because it doesn't affect how the model looks. If you were simplifying the actual model, you'd want to be a bit more careful with this, of course. But there's that. So I did some simplification. And then if you do simplification, you're going to want to redo optimize all indices because that'll have changed the vertice and triangle arrays. So always do optimize all indices after a simplify. And then save. Do an update bounds as well, out of habit for me. And now we're ready to go to collision. So I'm going to take these two NIFs. I'm going to use SSE NIF Optimizer to convert them to LE, because that's what chunk merge supports. You'll note the file size will basically double when you do that. I'm going to then move these NIFs to a working folder that I have for NIF Util Suite, right here. And then I'm going to switch to, here it is. This is chunk merge, okay? The way chunk merge operates is you have a target file, which is the actual NIF, and a collision file, which is this copy. The collision file can be the actual file. It can be the same file if you want one-to-one exact collision geometry. Most of the time, you don't want to do that. If it's a tiny object that's low poly, you can probably get away with it, and it's fine. By default, you don't want to do that. You want to make a copy, decimate it some, reduce the geometry. You always want to do that by default. It also has a template, which I store here. These are NIFs, and I can send these out, that have an example collision block structure for chunk merge to use as a template to generate for the actual NIF. Okay. All of my templates are identical except for the rigid body settings based on the layer that I'm generating for. So if I want a static, I have a static layer template. If I have a tree, I do tree, clutter, anim static, etc. This is a building, so it's going to be static. And what we're going to do is you're going to choose mesh data. And for material, this is where it can get a little tedious to do collision. You can have multiple materials in the same collision. It's just really tedious to set it up. In our example cathedral NIF, we have a bunch of different textures that are used. So I'm going to open my collision NIF. We're going to look at this, okay? Most of this is stone. This, tell you what, Sierra, what material would you say that is? Would you say that's a metal roof piece? What do you think?
Looks like it.
Okay. I thought so too. I was like, gotta have some involvement. So we got stone, we got metal, we have glass. Do you see any other materials present on this? Like this thing, that's a metal spike. So we got 3 materials. The way chunk merge does multi-material collision is in your collision NIF, the copy, you need to name your nitri shapes the name of the collision material. So this nitri shape, this first one, that's metal. So I'm going to rename that to Sky Have Matte Solid Metal. That's the internal name of the material. It's very wacky how these are named, but that's how it works. So it's got a... I'm working on that. When I get this working in NifSkope, it'll be a lot simpler. Solid metal. And you got to go through every single tri-shape and do this. So that looks like a glass. So Sky Have Matte Glass. That's another glass. Now here, if you have multiple tri-shapes that are going to get the same material, in NifSkope, you can double-click the name here. And if you see there's this number in brackets, that's a string index of the strings that are in the NIF. That's what's actually stored here. What you're doing when you change the text is it's changing the strings here on the file header. That's what that is. So on the block list, you can just type 27 in this case, and it's glass. On this one, that's a stone. So I'm going to do sky, have, mat, stone. Most of these are going to be stone. That's a glass. So 27. What do we got here? That's a stone. That's a glass. That's a glass. A lot of glass on here. There's more. That's more glass. This will take a second. It's a little. This is very tedious. But if you really want good material sounds in game, you want to do this correctly. That's a big stone one. That's a stone. That's a stone. That's a metal, so that one is 26. That's a stone. I don't even know where that one is. Where? Oh, back here. That's glass. That's glass. That's wrong. That's more glass. No.
Just a note. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. Good catch. Thank you. I caught myself, but thank you. This one too. Yeah, that's glass. You want in case it's not obvious, double check yourself. This one, that's the stone. That's glass. That's more glass. More glass. Oh my goodness. And more glass. Okay, that's all. Okay. Before you save, uncheck the auto sanitize before save button. Because multiple blocks cannot have the same exact text name. That's not allowed by the engine. But for this, because this NIF will never go in game, that doesn't matter. So disable auto sanitize before save for this NIF. Make sure you turn it back on afterwards. Save. And now what we're going to do, now that I've set up the materials, I set name of tri-shape in the collision material of chunk merge. And now all I got to do is click this button, add collision. And it broke. What the hell? I forgot to set the file. That helps. That would help. It'd help if I target the right file. So that's my target. The copy is my collision. Now do it. Might take a second if it's a big NIF. And collision added successfully. It's really tiny font. There's no chance you can read this on stream. Hell, I can barely read it on my monitor. But in the actual NIF, we have collision. Hey! And then if you go look down the block tree, down to the compressed mesh shape data, go down to chunk materials. Why do I have a none? I should not have a none. Did I miss one? Oh, I did. Oh, I did miss one. Hey! Okay. That is a glass. Let me redo that. I will redo that. Now, you don't ever want any nuns, because then if you shoot it with like a bow or hit it with a sword, you'll get no sound whatsoever in-game, which is very immersion breaking. Now if I do that... Yes, 3 chunk materials is all you should find. Solid metal, glass, stone. And the way this actually works under the hood is all of this collision is split into chunks, and each chunk has a material index. That is an index into this list for what material that chunk is going to use. It's very relational in the NIF format. But that's your collision. So now I can take, at this point, you can delete the collision NIF, unless you want to keep it for some reason. You can take the actual NIF. I'm going to move it back to my working folder. And I'm going to convert it back to SSE format. And now, back to BS tri-shapes with collision. Now, there's one thing missing. We have collision in this NIF now, but we don't have a BSX flags. So what you could do rather than adding it manually, which is a whole bunch of clicks, you can use the fixer, which will add it for me. It'll add the block and set the appropriate flags. After this, we're done. We have a finished NIF. This is implemented. The only other thing you'd want to do, and SNIFF doesn't have this yet because it's a little bit ambiguous, but you can do spells, sanitize, reorder blocks, like so. Because the block order on a lot of things is critically, it's inconsistent when the block order is important, but when it is important, it is apocalyptically critically important that it's correct. There's no gray area. There's no in between. It's amazing. But yeah, so sort blocks. Now the NIF is fully done. Now, if I were to take this and put it in my folder for implementation in game, where did I put that? Architecture, cathedral, exterior, here. Back to the CK. I forgot to load my plugin. Hold on. Where is it? Cathedral implementation test. I'm gonna load my file. And so I set up the model path in Xedit. If you, again, back to that, if you have one thing to implement, you can use the CK, you can use Xedit. There's no real difference between the two. If you have a lot of things to set up, I find Xedit to be much faster. Especially if the meshes that you're implementing are all in the same folder, because you can just copy paste the file path around. In the CK, it gets you a file selection prompt. You can't edit the path directly, so it's a lot slower for me. So I recommend Xedit for any kind of batch bulk work, right? So I got my plugin loaded. I should have. I did not. You know what? I forgot to load the ESM. Let me do that. And then I will show that it's in game. Does anyone, that was a very long technical ramble. Does anyone have any other questions? I will happily take questions.
Do they need to be serious?
Not necessarily.
Then I have none.
I mean, I'll take serious questions too, if you have any.
Oh, maybe later. Let's see.
That's okay. I see Pine of Flan, you're still working on your question. I am eager to see what you're asking. Okay, let me look. This, and then could you go on mute? You're echoing.
Getting some echo.
Lost Legend. Is he?
I force muted you, Lost Legend. So if you do want to speak, please type in the
Oh,
chat, and I'll
type in the chat. Yeah.
undo that.
Yeah, we don't need no echo. Can you mute? Your mic was echoing. Come on, CK. Our Skyblivion ESM is massive, so it does take some time to load. Hopefully, it doesn't take as long to load whatever you guys are working on. Ours is obscenely massive.
So you're using CKPE here, correct? Do you recommend
Yes,
that
ma'am.
as well?
Absolutely. I consider CKPE to be functionally, legally mandatory. For me, again, I'm a data guy. You know, some people have different opinions. But for me, I don't even entertain the notion of launching the CK without CKPE. I don't consider that even a thing that you can do. It's that important. And for Skyblivion...
That's kind of interesting. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no. Oh, no, go ahead. If you had a thought, go ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, because I installed CKP at first, but I think Beyond Skyrim uses a custom WinHttp.dll, which means that if you install CKPE and then replace the WinHT, that one,
The DLL. Yeah.
it yeah, the DLL.
You know what's
It
interesting?
kind of creates a weird hybrid between the old CK fixes and the CKPE. It's very funny.
So you know what's interesting about that? CKPE.
I'm a writer. I barely understand any of this.
You're okay. You're okay. I can explain this and it'll make sense. CKPE is CK fixes. We've just done some rebranding. It is the same thing. It's just now it's under that name because we changed. I didn't actually choose to rename it, but I helped with it, and Perchik wanted to rename it, so she did. So you know, but that custom DLL that you guys have, that's from us. That's from us. It's just older if you guys haven't updated to current. So that's not from anyone else, unless you had someone on your team custom compile their own, which I don't think is likely, but I suppose is possible. That's from us. Now that is a task. I admire the ambition for the reverse engineering talent, but I would highly. I love Eltrux. I talk shop with him. I love him to death. But that is a task I would not wish on anyone. I can't imagine doing that. It would be vastly less work to fix the CK we have than building a new one from scratch. But yeah. Yeah. Now, most people aren't going to have the capability of doing that. So we gotta work with what we can have people do. So CKPE is the way to go. That's what you want to use. You want to make sure you get the very latest. And I work on CKPE, so if anyone has any issues either with the CK, or stuff we can fix, or with CKPE itself, again, by all means ping me. I'll try to get it fixed. But yes, so to answer your point, CKPE mandatory. So now if echo mute. Let's see. Oh, because question. You're echoing. You're echoing still. Lost Legend. There you go. Would it be incorrect to call the memory optimizer a defragmenter for vertices and triangles? I've never thought about it that way, but I suppose that is accurate. That is technically accurate to what it's doing, to the data. But yeah, if so, are there any cases where it may make performance worse? No, that it can't do, because you're reducing the number of GPU shader invocations it takes to render the object. That can only, by definition, improve performance. You also mentioned a list. Is that the format in which model information is? Oh, yeah. So, so NIFs store. Well, there's two different ways to. There's some nuance into how to store geometry data, but I'll just explain BS trishape because that's what the block type you should be using. There's an array or a list, but really it's an array of vertices. Each vertex has a position XYZ, a bitangent, a UV X and Y coordinate, a normal X, Y, and Z, a bitangent Y, a bitangent Z, a tangent XYZ, vertex colors, if you have vertex color data enabled on the trishape, because that's optional. And then the triangles array is an array of 3 integers that point to array entries of the vertice array. So it's a linked array. The linked or some sort of it's not a multi-dimensional array. It's 2 separate distinct arrays, and one just references the other. Next, have there been any attempts at making an SE variant of chunk merge that are not Robert branded? As far as I know, the answer is no. I've never heard of any other attempts to do that. People just use chunk merge, which it works. It does work. It is functional. It's just really annoying because you have to convert to LE, set up your materials, blah, blah, blah. And on larger NIFs, it can crash. But I found that when doing so, and this is I don't have hard data on this, but I have found that NIFs that you don't optimize indices on are more likely to crash chunk merge. So I find for your collision NIF, optimize indices first, then convert to LE, then use it as a collision NIF in chunk merge. That's the order of operations there. I don't have hard data on that. It's a gut feeling. I haven't exhaustively tested that, but that's what it looks like, to me. What's your next question? Third, at what point of error threshold do holes begin to emerge in the model during decimation? None. There is no level in NifSkope Simplify that allows for holes. It doesn't exist. Assuming you don't unconstrain it at all. Like if you uncheck lock borders. Actually, no, I don't think it will either. Hang on, I'm actually curious. I'll use this one. So if I unconstrain it completely, oh there, okay. So you can't get some holes, but let me do. Okay, so if you uncheck lock borders, then you can do that. So always lock borders, always, and you won't get holes. You can unconstrain the normal weight, the normal UV and VCs, but that can change how it looks. I don't recommend doing that, but like if you're making a model like a static that has LOD, the LOD model you don't have to preserve normals as much because it's LOD. It's supposed to look terrible. And if you unconstrain it on that front, you can get lower geometry, which for LOD is what you want. That's the goal. But for a full model, I would always constrain that at maximum for the weights because you don't want to change how it looks. Let's see. What's his other question? What point? Are there any NIFs where collision with holes causes no noticeable effect, such as the bottom of a floor structure? Well, okay. That's kind of use case specific of a point, but like for this building, there is no floor because there doesn't need to be. There's no so this NIF's collision. There's no floor. I don't know if you can see that too well, but there's no floor. So there's no issue there. But if you're in like an interior and you have like a dungeon, and you got a hole in the floor that goes downstairs. I don't see any issues with that. Like if you have a hole in the NIF and there's no collision there, that would be correct actually. I'm trying to think. Is there any case where you'd have a NIF with a visible hole where you would want there to be collision covering the hole? I can't think of any. Sarah, can you think of anything like that? You can. Oh, what kind of example case can you think of? Because that's an interesting question. I like that question. Test 3 has wards mid-air as clear doors. Okay, so for something like that, I think I know what you're talking about. So for something like that, I would probably lean towards not putting collision in the NIF, but in the CK for your level design people, place a collision marker that then toggles based on when you need it to be there or not. That would be easier to do for that kind of a use case. If it's what I'm if you're talking about what I think you're thinking of, that's probably how I would do that. I wouldn't do that in the NIF. There's very niche things like that where you kind of have to do things differently. I am generalizing heavily for a lot of this stuff. But stuff like odd cases like that, if you're not sure, you can ping me. I can help you figure stuff out. I like figuring things out. And then you had another question. What dreadful fate awaits those like me who open the CK without the fixes? Well, okay. One, you will be functionally incapable of modding Skyblivion in any capacity with the CK because our ESM is too big. The stock CK cannot physically open it. It's too big. So on that front alone, CKPE will be mandatory to use the CK to mod Skyblivion. That won't be the case for most things, but for Skyblivion it is. I think Skywind, that'll probably be the case too, because they'll have another massive ESM. Some of the Beyond Skyrim projects, I think your ESMs are a bit smaller, so maybe that's not the case. But probably, if people have more than one loaded, yeah, you'll probably need that just for the reference handle. You'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can't load a lot of stuff in the CK without CKPE. You just can't. That, and there are numerous guaranteed crashes and just issues with the stock CK that we patch and we fix. The stock CK works, and the stock CK with all faults is what Bethesda uses to make the game. They don't have an internal version of the CK. They have the CK. So just think about that for a second. That's what they use. They make awesome games with the CK. I love Bethesda. I love Bethesda games. But my goodness, that's rough. So you're probably not going to have that great of a time. If you're doing just basic stuff, you're in the CK for 2 minutes, you're probably fine without CK. Like, it doesn't, like, in reality, you might be okay. I say, again, this is my opinion, I don't entertain the notion of starting the CK without CKPE. That's me. Again, I'm a data guy. I'm under the hood. I know how this works. That's me. That's what I say. And Arb, you do have a point. The master limit does screw up some projects. So you gotta, for the big projects, you have to have CKPE. It's required. You don't have a choice. Just because of how it works. Was there any other questions? Serious or not, I will take all questions. I do not care. Actually, no. Let me go somewhere important. Let me go to Tamriel. Let me go to here. This should be a place everyone here knows well. Very well. Okay. This is COC Whiterun. Do you also develop Skyblivion? No. So in Skyblivion, we don't believe under any circumstances in using old versions of anything. We have a hard requirement of the latest version of the game, the latest version of the CK, in all circumstances, whatever version number that happens to be at any given time. If Bethesda drops a game update, we will immediately update to account for it, and it will be the hard minimum required game version for Skyblivion. There will never be any exceptions to that for any reason. We don't use old, like Blender 4.5.1, that's the current version. Xedit 4150, that's the current version. Blah, blah, blah. Not at all. I consider game updates to be, in all circumstances, a good thing, including, I know this is a Skyrim server, but the so-called NG update to Fallout 4, which did break a bunch of things, which Bethesda is aware of, they are fixing. I consider game updates to be a good thing. Bug fixes, occasionally new features like new Papyrus scripting functions. I always welcome updates from Bethesda. I will never bash game updates, ever. There's stuff that they break. They're human. They make mistakes. That's normal. That's the human condition. I always welcome game updates. And tool updates, too. Like, we're about to drop an Xedit update. Once that goes public, I consider that the only valid version of Xedit to use. I'm biased because I'm a developer. Same for SNIFF, same for Blender, same for PyNifly. We use the current maintained versions of all tools. That's our opinion at Skyblivion. If they drop a game update, and for Skyblivion, we have to change some things to account for it, we will just do so. That's fine. That is desired effort. So we're okay with that. We have no problem with that whatsoever. Joshua. So now, if I go to AU Cathedral Test, that's what I named it. If I drop this in, hey, we have a... Oh, it's underground. Hello. So now, I have my new NIF and my CK... Hold on. I need to disable a thing. I know what's going on. That is that. Okay, so now we can see it. I've dropped it in game. It works. It's now implemented. The only thing you have to do for the static is, as Sarah was getting to, is you need to recalc bounds to get your object bounds set up. You can just do that. You right-click it, recalc bounds. Outside at this stage, we've got a NIF, we've error checked it, we've generated a collision, we've made sure it's in SE format, I've made a record for it in a plugin, it's implemented. That is the end of the journey for implementing an asset. We've gone through, I don't know if y'all want me to go through a primer on Xedit at large. I don't think you need to know everything about Xedit for implementation, but like we got Xedit, got the CK, we got SNIFF, NifSkope, chunk merge, NIF optimizer. For Blender, the plugin to use is PyNifly. If you give me a moment, I'll get links to where you can get all of these tools. Does anyone have any questions of any nature about any of this? Serious or not? Sarah, do you have any questions?
Of course I do.
Yes, bring it on. Give me questions.
Well,
I love
so
questions.
I just recognizing we're about an hour and a half of serious material here, so we may just want to wrap it up. But with that said, I do want to be sure we get any burning questions people have here today. And
Yes.
Robert, you've already said we can reach out to you if we have
Of course.
things after this, so that is awesome. I think one thing that I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I am not time constrained. I can hang around. I can hang around for a bit. Like if you want to cut the recording.
Yeah, I'll
at any
probably.
point, and I can hang around. Like I'm good.
Okay, let me ask this question and we'll get your answer, and then I'll probably cut the
Sure.
recording at that point, just because
Okay.
someone's going to have to turn this long video into something that
Oh,
actually renders.
Something workable. Oh no. Go ahead.
So you did get on this very briefly with some of the flags that are in vanilla NIFs that aren't necessary. I was wondering if you could expand on that. Are there other things in vanilla
sure can.
NIFs that we
Oh.
don't need to have?
Oh, that's funny you asked that question. Yes, there is. There's many things. In fact, you know what? This might take a minute to run, but I'm going to run this in the background. I don't know where I put it. Let me go find it. I have extracted. I have a copy of all the vanilla NIFs. I'm going to run the check error on that folder. That's going to take a minute because there's 22,000 NIFs in there. But yes, there is absolutely cases where stuff is wrong in the vanilla NIFs. Which, if you're a 3D artist or you're an implementer and you're trying to use a vanilla NIF as a reference point, I would 1000% exercise extreme caution in doing so, because Bethesda's internal NIF exporter had a lot of bugs when these NIFs were created. Setting flags that don't need to be set, not setting flags that should be set, having things just be wrong, that they fixed in their exporter, because I reported the bugs to them and they fixed them. But they didn't retroactively apply those fixes to the existing NIFs. That would be a massive game update. They'd have to test it, But, yeah, they were bugs recognized by Bethesda. So they're really bugs in their exporter. The most common will be, let me see. Let me go to architecture. Let me just pick something at random. Go to Farmhouse. Let's go to Farmhouse 01. Let's see what we can find here. Okay. There's a random 9 node in. I didn't even know this. There's a random 9 node in this NIF that serves no purpose whatsoever. And it's funny because their exporter has a function that removes those, and they didn't use it. That's funny, actually. Yeah, extraneous nodes. Not gonna break anything. That's not gonna crash the game, but useless. You can get rid of that. Let's look at these shaders. So we've got envmap light fade set, even though this is a default shader, so that doesn't apply. We've also got own emit set when this is not a glow shader and the emissive color is all zeros. That's doing nothing. Own emit enables, like if I set what shape is this? What am I looking at? That's that. If I set this to So like it'll render if you have a color set. Like you get this extra like effect, and you can put like the color to like that. You can do that with OwnEmit. However, if the color's all zeros, the effect is being rendered by the GPU, but is achieving absolutely nothing. So in SNIFF, if it detects that the shader type is not a glow shader, where OwnEmit is required, and the emissive color is all zeros, it will remove OwnEmit, because you're enabling a shader effect that is definitionally doing nothing whatsoever. And that's wasting GPU power. On an individual NIF, that won't make much difference, but at scale, that makes a big difference. It all adds up. Like, I've done all of these fixes I've done in SNIFF to the entirety of Skyblivion's meshes folder. Like, 100% full stop. If a flag does not need to be set, it should not be set, in my opinion. If a flag doesn't apply, it should be explicitly removed. That's the way I look at it. Again, I'm a data guy. I analyze data. OwnEmit and MMap white fade are common. Those, for some reason, their exporter set those flags on 100% of all shaders all of the time. I don't know how that happened, but it happened, and they fixed it. Like, their newer versions of their exporter don't do that, because that's definitely wrong. Yeah, they couldn't figure out why it happened either, how that came about. But that's a common one. You'll see textures being in fact, this thing's almost done. You'll see all sorts of those are the big ones for shader flags. There's other things like BSX flags is like, okay, on a static object for collision, you'll see the articulated flag set. That's absolutely wrong. If you have a static object that has collision, you want just the Havoc flag checked. This has external emittance, so you'll have that checked because there's a glow shader that uses it. But you don't need articulated, because articulated, the behavior that flag does only applies to clutter objects that you can, quote, grab and pick up and throw around. That's all that applies to. If it's not a clutter layered collision, don't set that flag, because it doesn't apply. Similar to complex, that is set on a lot of things with multiple collisions on it, which was the observation when the game was first being decoded like a decade ago. It has nothing to do with the fact that you have multiple collisions. That has to do with characters, the skeleton.nifs, the collisions in those nifs, because there's like 50 of them, and it deals with linking collisions together. It's a complex collision nif. That's what that flag is for. Okay? You'll see a lot of nifs that have both of those set when they don't need to be set. That's another common one. Now, this just finished. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, my goodness. Oh, look. Oh, my Lord. Look at this. Yeah. EnvMap. We've got, let's see. Oh, here's another thing. The game has a character lighting shader that it applies to characters, hence the name. However, it usually looks terrible. Community shaders, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but they by default disable that shader because it looks terrible. It makes things look worse. The reason it makes things look worse is because there's a shader flag that needs to be set on the tri-shape that it runs on to make it look good. I reverse engineered that and detected in SNIFF. All face gen NIFs, every tri-shape should have the character lighting flag set, which works with that shader to make it not look terrible. For some reason, it's not set on any of them. I couldn't tell you why. Let's see, what's other common ones? Like, that's all for face gen. There's duplicate geometry all over the place. There's blank vertex colors, which waste file size. Here's a texture that's assigned that's not used. We got animation keys that are not set correctly. There's, yeah, it's dire straits in vanilla. Like, my goodness, look at all this. How long is this? Hold on. How long is this log? 174,000 lines long. Oh my. That's rough. Holy. I've never run this on the whole game before.
Well,
That's
not
a lot.
and not
Holy moly.
not that we would probably advise this, but if you were to run the automatic fixes, would it fix all those things?
Or the things that are deterministic in nature, yes.
I mean, that's
Now,
pretty impressive. The
you could
bulk things
you
you can do.
you could extract all the vanilla NIFs, install that as a mod in MO2, and just for like giggles, run the fixer on them. And actually, I should probably do this because I do this with Skyblivion. Like when I come up with a new fix, a new thing to check, I run it on the entire Skyblivion build to find bugs and find cases where like, okay, don't do that, and I try to expand the handling. You could do that on all of vanilla NIFs and just see, hey, what breaks. That would be very educational, for me, at least. Some of y'all might not care about that, but for giggles, you could do that and just see what happens. Like all white vertex colors does nothing. Same thing as with emissive color being all zeros. If you have vertex colors enabled on a tri-shape, but there's no vertex that has a non-blank vertex color color, you're enabling extra shader stuff without doing anything. So SNIFF reports that because you should just get rid of it. Now the fixer doesn't automatically do that one in particular, because there are circumstances where vertex colors is required by, say, the parallax shader requires it. If you have a tree that has the leaf, the sort of the wiggle animation thing on, that requires vertex colors. So the fixer won't do that, but that's a separate function. There's a vertex color painting function. You can do that. You can remove if all colors are equal to the specified color, and it defaults to all Fs. By and large, I would always remove it if it's blank. That wastes file space, and that wastes rendering power for nothing. So stuff like that. If it's reported in SNIFF, I fix it. Like, unless you can find an odd case where it's actually correct, by all means ping me. Please tell me. I need this information. I haven't, for the current state of SNIFF, it's correct for what it reports. All software has bugs. We know this. Obviously, ping me if there's issues. Absolutely. See, here's a case. This one might be relevant for anything that's armors or something that you wear that is skinned. If it's a wearable thing, the block needs to be a BS dismember skin instance linked to a body slot. You should not leave any of those as a nice skin instance. One, the CK will complain, and you won't have proper partitions linking to body slots if you leave it like that. Like it won't crash the game, like it'll render in game, but it won't be linked up properly. So SNIFF reports that. I think there's a couple cases I need to change the logic, but in the cases where it applies, it'll report a nice skin instance that should be a dismember skin instance. So it does have that. I think I talked about that last time, Sarah. I mentioned that. Here we go. Here's one. This is textures being missing. Here's one you'll see a bit in vanilla NIFs. Rim and soft lighting shader flags cannot be set together. Those are mutually exclusive shader effects. If you see that, more than likely, you're going to want soft lighting, not rim lighting. Rim lighting is very rarely desired or used by the artist. If you see both, go to soft lighting. Here's a case where envmap light fade is not set, but the shader is a type that requires it. So it reports missing as well as unneeded for all of these. Here's a texture that has a texture in slot 2 that's not used. I'm just flipping through this at this point. But, here's one. Here. This one's important for collision. If you have a BHK list shape, which is a way to have multiple collision geometry blocks under the same rigid body, that only supports the primitive block types, where the collision geometry is one block. If you have a BHK convex transform shape, which is it transforms and then it has a child block for the geometry, that being in a list shape, the CK will complain about this. It won't resolve the materials correctly if you do that. Like, it won't crash the game. Like, not all of this is crashy, but you'll you don't want to do that. So list shapes, I don't like list shapes in general. They're annoying to set up. Some people use it because it, if they're used to it. I just use chunk merge. I use mesh collision. It's the simplest to do, simplest to set up, and it works. You don't got to worry about stuff like that. But you can use list shapes. It's valid. Just don't have multi-block collision geometry types on those. Materials don't work correctly. I don't think there's any other major ones. If you have an alpha property that uses alpha blending, this one you need to be careful with, because on the tri-shape that alpha property is attached to, it will disable shadows for that tri-shape. And it forces the object for shader purposes to single pass mode. So if you have this on a static, and you have a directional material applied to the static record, and that material is a multi-pass shader, it will break it if you have an alpha property with blending. It can also cause odd lighting issues, which gets into shadows, don't work. You can force shadows to work on an alpha blended tri-shape by adding the assume shadow mask shader flag. You also need that if you have dynamic decal set, if it's a decal, because that also disables shadows and other things for the render pipeline. We don't know why it does this. Where our thinking is, if you're using a decal, it's simpler on the GPU to not have some stuff applied, but shadows I think should always apply. So you can assume shadow mask to turn that back on in such cases. And SNIFF will automatically fix this one. It does not touch the alpha property. That just is a check. It's just a report. Trying to think. The rest of this is already kind of covered. BS value nodes have to have a certain specific naming convention required by the engine. Missing BSX flags. We got checks for all this stuff. I think that about covers what you asked, Zero. Was there anything else?
Nope.
For like
think
vanilla
that,
NIFs?
well, I guess only one other quick question. So
Sure.
the BSX flags we've talked about, the flags on the actual BS tri shape that's always like 5
Oh, here.
to 4, blah blah blah.
Oh, this.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't need that. Set it to 14. This flag, one, in the game's code, that's not even what that flag is. That's something completely different. So I need to do this. I need to update these flags in NifSkope because a lot of these are wrong. Set it to 14. That's what you want. You don't. A lot of vanilla NIFs have flag 19 set. It's a no-op in most cases. These flags, other than the first 4, 0 to 3, are for very specific circumstances that I would find it extremely unlikely most people would encounter that situation. They're for weird, hard-coded behaviors in the EXE. It's extremely unlikely anyone's going to... It's possible. In Skyblivion, we use a couple of them for a few things. But for most purposes, you can set the flags to 14, which is 1, 2, and 3, which are required on every shape. And or 15, if you have hidden for, like, on a weapon, the 2 blood decal NIFs, the tri-shapes, those have to have hidden set because those are managed by the engine. So 14 or 15 is what you would want for that one. So yeah, you don't need this for really anything. And like when I get a NIF and I see those, because there's some older tools that will automatically set it because the logic was thinking, well, vanilla sets it, let's do that. Which is not faulty logic for the time, because brand new game, they're picking it apart. Oh, there's patterns here. Let's follow the patterns. That is safe logic. It's very safe logic to follow. But now we know that that's not what that does, and you don't need to do that for like flags and stuff. So 14 or 15 if you need the hidden flag, etc.
Awesome. That is great. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the recording here. But before I do
Okay.
that, let me just say thank you, Robert. This was really, really awesome. I think we've all learned quite a bit today. It's
I
great.
hope so.
Hopefully this recording turns out usable because I think we're going to want to refer back to this. So thank you guys that are here. Please feel free to stay on and we can keep bugging Robert, but I'm going
Yeah,
to...
if you got questions, even informal ones, I will happily take questions.
Great.
Whatever you might have.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
There is much to learn.